Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where today I'm going to take a dive into state politics more broadly in Australia and look at some instances of forever governments. So what do I mean exactly? This video I'm going to talk about 3 instances of incumbent governments that have been around for a long time and are basically in with at least a good shot of continuing at least in the next cycle. And then I'm going to look at South Australia as well, where I'm predicting that another forever government will form over the next couple of cycles. So some of the key features here that I'm sort of using as my criteria are things like favourable demography, especially an evolving demography of a state that continues to favour the incumbent government, as well as the electoral conditions, whether it be the seats on the map or like the Hare-Clark system, an opposition that's just too beset with infighting and basically just can't get it together at all, and also leaders who are unusually popular or enduring. So some or all of those elements necessarily create the conditions for what I'm calling a forever government. So we're going to start in Victoria, the devil you know. So Brad Batten became leader right at the end of last year of the Victorian Liberals, but basically the infighting that's occurring between the moderate and the conservative factions is just insane, and he can't keep the party together. He had the support of conservatives at the party room, and he picked off enough moderates to win the leadership ballot over Jess Wilson effectively, I guess. But that support could be starting to desert him a little bit now, although I'm not sure who would necessarily be next in line. But the problem that he's having is that the operatives within the party and within the factions generally choose to go public with their disputes. There's this sort of violent power struggle within the party, and they're not afraid to sort of drag the party name down into the depths if it means that their faction can sort of get a leg up over the other one. And it's just making life so hard as far as Batten's concerned. The fallout from the Pizzuto and Deeming case is just never ending, and it's this constant source of embarrassment and distraction for the opposition. And just to add on to it, the Liberals might end up contesting some certain regional seats alongside the Nats. So particularly in Benambra, where Bill Tilley is retiring of the Liberals, but also seats like Bendigo East, maybe even Ripon and a couple of others. The Liberals and Nats might actually be sort of partly in competition, as well as against Labor, which will be sort of like a suck on their resources unnecessarily. The coalition faces a pretty difficult map as well. Victoria has definitely had an electoral realignment in recent cycles, where the more affluent eastern suburbs and the regional centres, particularly Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo to some extent, they've all trended quite hard to Labor in recent years, whereas the rural seats and some of Melbourne's like lower socioeconomic areas in the southeast and the northwest, they have trended to the coalition. But the trends towards Labor have been quite fast, but the trend going back the other way to the Liberals has been much slower. And so what that's meant is that the Liberals have these big margins to overcome in seats that haven't been historically very competitive, so they don't really have like a history of party structure or campaign infrastructure or anything in these places, and they've just got to come in and try and convince people that that 9% swing that they need in some random northwestern seat in Melbourne is going to happen. And it's difficult. It really looks like it's going to be a difficult map for them. And the other thing coming that's sort of been on my mind is that could it really get much worse for the Labor government in terms of their standing? There was some recent polling from both Redbridge and Newspoll which showed that vote intention wise Labor would get re-elected if an election was held tomorrow, but there is this deep dissatisfaction with Jacinta Allen personally and with her government. But I just wonder if the impact of some of these unpopular issues, things like crime, the Emergency Services Volunteer Levy, the fallout from the Commonwealth Games cancellation in 2023, even like stuff like road conditions, those issues are biting really hard now. But I think no matter how hard the Herald Sun tries, some of that stuff might have actually eased in the minds of voters by late 2026. And further to that, some of these big infrastructure projects, Westgate Tunnel, Metro Tunnel, for example, they'll probably be online. So right now, the Labor government doesn't really have anything to sell. But come 2026, they actually will. So it looks to me as if this is like a low point for the Labor government and they're still ahead of the Liberals. And I can't imagine things getting worse. If the Liberals were able to sort out their internal affairs, put together a solid platform and go out and take it to an election, they would probably win, but it's honestly a big if. So let's move down to the Apple Isle, Tasmania, holding the centre. So what was the point? They're going to the polls in 2 weeks, and after 11 years in the wilderness, Dean Winter basically took the plunge, saw the success of Albanese's federal Labor government down in Tasmania, where they won like 61% of the two-party preferred vote, and he basically seized the opportunity and said, all right, we're going to go for it. However, what we've had is 3 of the last 4 public polls have actually credited the Liberals with a polling lead. And we're not talking a little one, more like 6-7%. So if Tasmanians do re-elect the Liberals, you get the sense that history is going to judge Dean Winter and Tasmanian Labor pretty harshly. Now, a few caveats here. Firstly, Tasmanian Labor could win this election, and that makes the inclusion of Tasmania in this video pretty stupid. But I did want to include it anyway because there are some interesting sort of aspects to it. And secondly, on those public polls, of the 4 ones that I've seen so far this cycle, it looks like YouGov, which showed Labor slightly in the lead, is the only one that is actually independent. The Demos AU one was commissioned by some unknown peak body, and then the 2 waves of EMRS were commissioned by the Liberals. So you could have the case where the Liberals and their friends are trying to paint a picture of them being the only party that can really form government, but in reality, vote intention surveys that are completely unbiased might be showing that Labor are in the lead. So, let's not get overexcited. So what I thought might be interesting here is talking about what's really happening with Labor in Tasmania. The Liberal Party here has very much aligned themselves in the centre, very sort of moderate Liberals compared with some of the other divisions, particularly the federal division. And I think the Greens down here in Tasmania too, they're probably a little bit more connected with like the old traditional conservation wing of the Greens Party rather than this kind of rabid, like really socially progressive Greens Party that particularly is dominant in Victoria. And that's left the Tasmanian Labor Party with not much room to move. And over the last 10 years or so, they've really had trouble defining exactly who they are and why they exist. They also have these, I think the public have memories of the Labor Greens coalition in 2010 to 2014. And there is this tendency for Tasmanian voters to try and back the winning horse. And there has been, so in some of them, like the independent polls, it's shown that Tasmanians don't really want the Greens involved in some sort of like supply or guarantee, and they would prefer a majority government. So I'm sort of getting the sense that the Liberals are trying to paint the picture that they're the only party that can form majority. And if that is a message that does cut through, that's going to make it really difficult for Labor in this cycle. But also, if you look at the demography of Tasmania and the way it's evolving, Tasmania is generally becoming older and I think also less educated. And when you look at sort of the peculiarities of the Hare-Clark system, as well, and the way you sort of form government out of it. Labor just have this difficult electoral prospect of trying to find enough primary vote to beat the Liberals in a state where the demography is working against them, and both the Liberals and the Greens have kind of closed in around them in a way that they haven't necessarily in the other divisions, and particularly federally in Australia. So it's quite a unique challenge, I think, that Tasmanian Labor face, and I'm really interested to see how it all plays out there. But again, it could make me look pretty foolish putting Tasmania in this video, but I thought it would counterbalance the fact that all the other forever governments in here are Labor. So let's jump over to the ACT, 7 terms later. So ACT Labor, obviously 7 terms into government, pretty unprecedented, and even in 2024 they remained popular, and I think particularly Chief Minister Andrew Barr remains popular, and I would say had he retired in 2024 they would have struggled to form government, but his sort of enduring leadership I think was a big part of why they won. I think also Canberra, it's always been like a city of public servants, but increasingly it's becoming a progressive city, and in the 21st century they're just not embracing the Canberra Liberals, who have this sort of historical perception of being associated with the Christian right wing of the party, which of all the divisions in Australia where that would be helpful, this is not at all the one. And despite the fact that ACT Labor have been coming under increasing pressure, whether it be sort of the perceived neglect of the suburbs of southern Canberra, or the most recent budget, which featured the increased health levy and basically all stick and no carrot. I think what happened earlier this year was that the federal Liberals basically just stared Canberra in the face and said, screw you, we want to alienate you and make you feel bad. And that definitely has to bleed through in terms of the overall brand image of the Liberal Party in Canberra. And I think there is some evidence that both in the territory election of 2024 and particularly federally in the seat of Bean, that Labor voters are perhaps more likely to go independent, particularly with the increasing influence of David Pocock in the region, rather than necessarily straight to the Liberals, who have a historical and a sort of current branding issue. Finally, we have South Australia, Alex's antics. So you guys would have seen that poll. So this is YouGov from late May, with the Labor Party nearly 50% of the primary vote, and the Liberals all the way back on 21%. Labor 17% ahead on two-party preferred, and there was some outrageous, like personal ratings and preferred premier numbers for Peter Malinauskas. The poll could have been coloured a little bit by the proximity to the federal election win, and whether that sort of affects the sample, or because there was this immediate sort of honeymoon period for the federal government, like that could have some impact. But the poll does actually square up with the swing at the 2024 Black by-election. And further to that, if you look at the Demos AU poll of South Australia from the lead up to the federal election, from what I recall, the state government was running about 7% ahead of the federal government, and the federal result ultimately was about 60-40. So if they're still running 7% ahead, that would be 67-33. So what's going on? Basically, firstly, the South Australian Liberals were undermined by the way David Spears bowed out under the whole cocaine drug thing. But then, under the surface, Alex Antic has basically run this big recruiting campaign where, from what I understand, he's gone around to all the churches and recruited new members, and he's basically managed to take control not only of a lot of the branches and the party membership as a whole, but also he has enough friends in the state council. So they've dumped net zero as policy, and this played out, this kind of factional warfare definitely played out in late 2024 with MLC Ben Hood's abortion bill, the private members bill, which was basically, from what I can tell, it was a factional play by the Conservatives in the Liberals. And then compounding these woes is that Malinowskis's Labor has sort of done what Albanese was able to do and firmly claimed the centre, and along with his really impressive personal ratings and the approval for his leadership, who would want to vote Liberal if you're sort of in the centre and you like Peter Malinowskis? So it leaves them with basically nowhere to go, and they've just got this massive uphill battle to try and form into a more cohesive party and put together something that's actually going to challenge the Malinowskis government. So that's about it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back later in the week with more Tasmanian election coverage. And I want to give an update on the UK soon too, because there's been some interesting developments. But thanks for watching, and thanks also to the Sloan Zone, who gave me a little shout out the other day. So cheers all, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.